Do villains have arcs? Do they need them? Does any of this matter? Today I'm going to answer these questions, so stick around. What's up, guys? My name is Brandon McNulty. I'm a writer, and welcome to my writing channel. Today, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking about the subject of character arcs specifically for your villains. And this is something that a lot of writers have trouble with because they get confused. They wonder, well, okay, villains, do they have to be just, pure evil from start to finish? Or, can they have variations with their character arcs? Do they need them? And the answer is that I think it helps if your villains do have a character arc. They don't necessarily have to have one, and that's something I'll talk about later in the video. But I think when you're writing villains and you're writing any major characters in your story, you have to remember that character arcs make the characters more interesting. And villains, I know oftentimes we think of them as something different from the other characters, like they're pushed off to the side, they're different from your protagonists and your supporting cast, but villains are characters. And because they're characters, they have access to all the different character arcs. Now, mainly when it comes to character arcs, you have the comedic arc, which would be like a positive arc where you have a flaw and then you overcome that flaw by the end of the story. And then you also have the tragic arc where you have a flaw and you succumb to that flaw at the end of the story. Now, when it comes to villains specifically, they usually have two different types of arcs. And the first arc is what I call the cross-the-line arc, and this is a form of the tragic arc. Basically, when you have a villain, you establish them early on as this flawed character. Maybe they've committed some horrible crimes in the past, some major atrocities, whatever it is. They start off flawed. Over the course of the story, they go through conflict, they have opportunities to change, and then at the end, they have a choice where they can either become a better person or they become a worse person. And they ultimately decide to become a worse person. They cross a line that they have never crossed before. And it's tragic, it's bad, it's negative for them and the people around them. It ultimately brings about destruction somewhere down the line. Now, on the other hand, you can have a villain who goes through a redemption arc. This is something that we see in Return of the Jedi with Darth Vader. He starts off as a character who has committed a lot of crimes in the past. He goes through some conflict with Luke. He does some soul searching. And then at the end, he decides to finally redeem himself by going back toward the light side, making a choice to save Luke and throw the Emperor down a shaft. Now, those two arcs are the most popular when it comes to writing villains. And I want to point out that if you're writing a series and you have a villain who appears in multiple books, for instance, if you're writing a trilogy and you have a villain who appears in books 1, 2, and 3, you can have this villain have differing arcs from book to book. For instance, you might have in book 1 that villain is somebody who, goes down that negative arc, they cross a line, but in book 2 they have a redemption arc and they change and they join up with the hero. And this is something we saw in the Star Wars sequel trilogy with Kylo Ren. In those first 2 movies, he follows those negative arcs, those cross-the-line arcs. We see this in episode 7 where Kylo Ren makes the decision to kill his father, Han Solo, when Han tries to pull him back to the light side. This is a problem for Kylo Ren because he thinks he can become more powerful if he learns from Supreme Leader Snoke. If he stays with the dark side, he can achieve more power. He makes that decision to cross the line and kill his father in order to become more powerful. We see another negative arc in episode 8, and this is when Kylo Ren starts off in roughly the same position as he did at the beginning of episode 7. He's ruthless, he's willing to kill people, he'll do whatever it takes to achieve more power. But he's also conflicted. When he gets the opportunity to kill Princess Leia, he refuses to do it. When he's conversing with Rey throughout the course of the story, we see him second-guessing himself. And then toward the end of the story, he has a big decision to make. Him and Rey can help decide the fate of the galaxy. But instead of Kylo Ren doing the right thing, he goes further down the dark path, he takes the tragic turn, he betrays Rey, he goes against her, and he achieves more power in the process. He goes after his greatest desire. It's not until episode 9 that he has a redemption arc, and once again we see Kylo Ren in a position where he wants power at the start of the movie. It's consistent throughout the entire trilogy. That's his flaw. He wants power. He desires it more than anything. But in episode 9, instead of chasing power at the end, he opts to destroy it. He opts to help Rey defeat Emperor Palpatine and restore balance to the galaxy. So there's an example of a character who undergoes 2 different types of character arcs over the course of a trilogy. And this is something that you can use in your own series for maximum impact. One thing I want to point out is that a lot of times when you have villains who undergo that redemption arc, for whatever reason, writers make the decision to kill them off right after they have their redemption. I think it's often done because it's a sort of sacrifice. Like you have a scenario where, okay, he did a lot of terrible things, and in order to redeem himself, he has to sacrifice his life. But keep in mind that a lot of readers have an interest in how a character like Kylo Ren could potentially redeem themselves and then face the aftermath, face the crimes that they committed. And that's something that you could potentially work into your own stories if you want to, take a different route with this. Instead of just going with the traditional, he sacrifices himself in order to save these people and then he dies and he doesn't have to face punishment. You can instead, have that villain face punishment. It's something to think about. Another thing I want to point out in regards to villain arcs is that it helps if you can tie in your villain's arc to your protagonist's arc. This is something that can offer a lot of impact to your story. And basically what you can do, you can have two characters struggling with the same problems or the same flaw, and then show two different paths that you can take. For instance, in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, Rey and Kylo Ren are basically suffering from the same flaw. Yes, Kylo Ren wants power, but ultimately these two characters are trying to decide who they are as people. They're trying to define themselves. They're trying to make sense of their powers, their abilities, how they respond to the Force, all those different things. The difference is that when Rey has a major decision to make at the end of these movies, instead of chasing power, she ultimately decides to use her power to help those around her, whereas Kylo Ren chases power for selfish reasons. So something to think about, and it's a great way to show two sides of the coin as far as overcoming a flaw or, pursuing a goal or whatever you're working with in your story. One final thing I want to cover in regards to villain arcs is that villains can also have a flat arc where they don't change either way over the course of the story. And this is especially true when it comes to non-human characters like the xenomorph and alien. Obviously, the xenomorph is a creature that operates based on instinct and survival. You can't expect it to make moral decisions. But you can also have human villains who act consistently over the course of the story, and they don't change from start to finish at all. They don't have that negative arc, they don't have that redemption arc, they simply stay the same over the course of the story. Oftentimes these particular villains will simply act as obstacles for your heroes over the course of the story. They won't be as exciting or as compelling as characters like Darth Vader, but they serve the purpose of throwing up roadblocks for your heroes. So I hope this advice helped. Question of the day, who is your favorite villain and what type of character arc or arcs do they have over the course of their story? Let us know in the comments section below, and also be sure to mark for spoilers. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. Hit the like and subscribe buttons for me. Share this video with a friend if you don't mind. And as always, remember to keep on writing.